Hello, I'm Arlena Wren. My family told the world my father was dead for 30 years. But I found his signature buried in an inheritance ledger no one thought I'd ever read. They erased me from the funeral, from photos, from history, all to steal $50 billion. They said I was unstable, unworthy, unwanted. But if he was truly gone, why did his compass show up in a locked yacht? Why did I hear his voice on a cassette no one knew existed? And why, after all these years, does the mansion still remember me? The rain had been falling since morning, tapping softly against the attic window like it had something to say. The smell of dust and cedar hung heavy in the air as I opened another worn cardboard box. My mother's handwriting scrawled across the top in fading blue ink, winter clothes. Inside were sweaters, a broken brooch, and a stack of yellowed envelopes tied with twine. Nothing special, until I saw the leather-bound ledger at the bottom. It looked out of place, too official, too deliberate. The kind of thing you'd expect in a law office, not buried under scarves. My fingers hesitated before touching it. The cover cracked slightly when I opened it, and the pages inside smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic. Ink, maybe. The header read Wren Estate Foundation. And then I saw it. The signature. Orion Wren. My father's name. My heart stuttered. The room felt smaller, air thickening as though the walls were closing in. He'd been gone 30 years. I'd watched the closed casket roll down the church aisle. I'd heard the priest's words. I'd seen my mother's blank stare. Yet there it was, his signature, dated 5 years after the day they said he died. I whispered the name aloud, as if saying it might make it vanish. But it didn't. The ink sat there, confident and unapologetic. My mind scrambled for explanations. Clerical error, forgery, coincidence. Anything but the truth clawing at the edges of my thoughts. For a while I just stood there, listening to the rain on the roof and the faint creak of the floorboards beneath me. The ledger slipped from my hands and landed open on a page marked Inheritance Allocations. There was a list of family names. My mother, my brother Harlan, my sister Isolde. But not me. My name wasn't there. That wasn't new. I'd been excluded before, in meetings, decisions, even conversations. But seeing it in black and white, written under the name of a man who was supposed to be dead, it burned deeper than any family argument ever had. The power went out for a moment, and lightning cracked through the window. I caught my reflection in the glass, pale, trembling, eyes wild. I whispered, "What if he didn't die?" It sounded insane even to me, but so had the last 30 years of silence. When the storm eased, I carried the ledger downstairs. The house felt emptier than usual, like it was holding its breath. My mother had died 3 months ago, and the walls still carried her perfume, lavender and guilt. I made tea just to have something to do with my hands. The cup rattled slightly against the saucer. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just opened a door that should have stayed closed. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the blinds, cutting lines across the dust. I hadn't slept much. My mind replayed every family moment, every strange pause, every look between my siblings whenever Dad's name came up. It all felt staged now, rehearsed. I went upstairs again, to the room I grew up in. It didn't smell like me anymore, just cardboard, mothballs, and time. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, a few trophies, some yearbooks. I pulled one box aside, and a framed photo slid out, the glass cracked but intact. It was of me and my father at the marina, both of us laughing. I turned it over, and on the back, in his unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For when they try to erase me, love, Dad." My legs gave out, and I sat on the floor. My fingers traced the curve of each letter. The handwriting matched perfectly, the same confident loops as the signature in the ledger. I'd know it anywhere. I remember that day vividly. He had bought me a tiny compass keychain and said, "When you get lost, this will remind you which way is home." I'd lost the compass years ago. Or maybe someone had taken it, like everything else tied to him. The photo blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I wasn't crying from sadness. It was fury, disbelief, betrayal, all tangled together. I grabbed the ledger again, comparing the ink strokes under the lamp. There was no denying it now. He was alive when they claimed he wasn't. The afternoon dragged by in fragments. I tried to eat, couldn't. Tried to call my brother, but the line went straight to voicemail. Tried my sister next, same result. They were probably together, as always, shielding each other from whatever truth might shake their perfect little world. By dusk, the rain had stopped. I took the ledger and photo outside, standing on the front porch where my father and I used to sit every summer evening. The wood creaked under my bare feet, and thunder rolled faintly in the distance again. The air smelled like wet pine. I laid both items on the table beside me, staring at them under the porch light. I remembered the estate meeting 30 years ago, right after the funeral. They had called it a formal closure. There was no "we'll read aloud," no mention of assets, no explanation. Just polite nods, signed papers, and a souled whispering, "It's for the best, Arlena." At the time, I believed her. I was 25, grieving, trying to hold what was left of our family together. But the truth was, I'd been shut out. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how deliberate it all had been. The quick funeral, the sealed coffin, the missing details. And now this ledger, this signature. The porch light flickered, and I felt the weight of years pressing down on me. I could almost hear his voice, steady and calm, the way he'd sound when I messed something up as a kid. "Don't let them shame you into silence," he used to say. "Silence is how they win." I looked out toward the old oak trees swaying in the dark. Somewhere out there, maybe, was a man who'd never really died. Or maybe I was chasing ghosts. Either way, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I took a deep breath, set the cup aside, and pulled the ledger close again. My thumb rested over the ink of his name, the loop still bold after all this time. If it was a forgery, I'd find out who did it. If it was real, then my entire life had been built on a lie. The air turned cooler, and the sky rumbled again. I stood, clutching both the ledger and the photo, feeling the storm inside me match the one rolling over Charleston. For the first time in decades, I felt awake. Not free, but awake. I didn't know what waited for me in the days ahead, but one thing was certain. I wouldn't confront them yet. Not until I knew everything. The truth had been buried once. I wasn't going to let it happen again. I looked down at my father's words, for when they tried to erase me, I whispered, "I found you, Dad. I'm not letting go this time." The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the porch as thunder echoed again. Somewhere in that sound, I thought I heard a faint whisper of his voice, whether memory or madness I couldn't tell. Either way, it was enough to move me forward. I closed the ledger, tucked the photo inside, and stared out into the storm. I didn't realize back then that finding the signature wasn't the beginning, it was the second betrayal. Morning came slow and heavy, the kind of gray Charleston morning that made the whole city feel like it was underwater. The rain had stopped, but fog still clung to the streets, curling around the iron gates and damp sidewalks. I hadn't slept. The ledger and the photo from last night lay open on my kitchen table, staring back at me like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. I didn't make breakfast. My stomach had been in knots since I found that signature. All I could think about was the missing pieces, the legal meetings, the sealed envelopes, the conversations I wasn't invited to. Someone had made sure my father's death stayed unquestioned. By 8, I grabbed my coat and drove downtown. Charleston was just waking up, people heading to work, storefronts opening, the sound of a streetcar clattering in the distance. I parked near the corner of King and Wentworth, across from the building where my father's estate lawyer used to have his office. The brass letters on the frosted glass door still read Alfred Boone, attorney at law, but the blinds were drawn. I tried the handle. Locked. I knocked once, twice. Nothing. Then I saw the small sign taped to the inside window, closed indefinitely due to illness. It looked old, sun-faded. I was about to leave when I noticed the stack of mail shoved into the door slot. Yellowed envelopes, some torn. Curiosity tugged at me. I glanced around. No one was watching. The hallway was empty. I reached in, pulled a few papers out, and sat on the steps outside to look through them. Most were junk mail, but one manila envelope stood out. It had the Wren Estate Foundation seal on it. My pulse quickened. I opened it carefully and slid out several pages clipped together. The top one read Inheritance Disavowal Document, 1995. My eyes froze on the first paragraph. It was an amendment removing one heir due to voluntary withdrawal. My name, Arlena Wren. There was no voluntary anything about it. The signature beneath my printed name wasn't mine. It was written in someone else's careful, practiced handwriting. Below that were the signatures of my siblings, Isolde and Harlan, and Alfred Boone. This was an illegal mistake, I whispered, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. They erased me, with ink and silence. For a few moments I just sat there, staring at the words, the cars passing by like the world didn't just tilt on its axis. Boone must have known. He'd helped them do it. I needed to see him. Someone had to know where he'd gone. I crossed the street to the coffee shop he used to visit every morning. The same waitress was there, wiping down the counter. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you remember Alfred Boone? Used to come here. Tall, gray suit, coffee with honey." She looked up, surprised. "Mr. Boone? Oh, honey, he retired about 10 years ago. Moved somewhere upstate, I think. Poor man's health went downhill. Do you know if he kept any of his files?" She shook her head. "They cleaned out his office after he left. Family took the rest. You related to him?" I forced a small smile. "Something like that." Driving home, my mind buzzed with questions I couldn't quiet. 10 years ago. That meant his files had likely been buried, destroyed, or hidden somewhere safe. But if this document survived, others could too. The fog lifted a little by the time I pulled into the driveway. My mother's car still sat under the oak tree, covered in pollen, unmoved since she passed. I unlocked the front door and went straight to her study, a room I'd avoided for years. The air was stale, full of lavender and dust. I turned on the desk lamp. The keys to the estate archives hung where they always had, behind her portrait. My hand hesitated before taking them. Downstairs, the small door behind the staircase opened with a long groan. The hidden room had always fascinated me as a kid, a place I wasn't allowed to enter. Now I knew why. Stacks of files, ledgers, and photo boxes filled the shelves. I searched through until I found a black folder labeled Orion Wren, Final Agreement. The sight of his name still felt like a punch to the chest. Inside were scanned pages, faintly wrinkled. The title page read Executive Transfer of Ownership. My father's name appeared next to his shaky signature, the ink pressure uneven like his hand had been guided or forced. The date stopped me cold, 2 weeks before his supposed death. I leaned against the filing cabinet, the room spinning. He'd been alive when they stripped him of everything. Alive when they cornered him. Alive when they took his company, his estate, his dignity. I whispered, "What did they do to you, Dad?" I read through the fine print. The document transferred full control of Wren Estate holdings to Isolde and Harlan. The witness line listed Alfred Boone again. Every page stank of coercion. My anger built slowly, like water heating before it boils. I could almost hear my siblings' voices, Isolde's cool dismissiveness, Harlan's smug laugh. They called me naive. They said I was too emotional to handle family business. And now I knew why. I sat on the floor and flipped to the final page. The signature wasn't just shaky, it was broken, letters uneven and slanted. Not my father's usual confident loops. It looked like someone signing under duress. The clock above the door ticked loudly in the silence. I didn't cry this time. The tears had already burned themselves out the night before. Now, there was only focus. By the time the sun dipped low, I knew what I had to do. If they'd buried the truth 30 years ago, I'd dig it up with my own hands. I spent the next few hours scanning the documents, taking photos, and storing digital copies in 3 different drives. I wasn't going to let them vanish again. Then I changed clothes, slipped the papers into my purse, and drove to the family estate for dinner. Dinner was a ritual we'd kept up for appearances. Every Thursday, same table, same polite lies. The mansion's lights glowed like gold teeth against the dark. When I walked in, I could hear them already laughing in the dining room. "Arlena," Isolde greeted me, her tone perfectly balanced between sweetness and disdain. "You're late again. We were just talking about you." "I'm sure you were," I said, hanging my coat on the chair. Harlan poured himself another glass of wine. "You look tired, still chasing ghosts." "Something like that," I replied. I slid into my seat, my purse resting against my leg. Dinner went on in the usual rhythm. Small talk, half-truths, little barbs dressed as jokes. But tonight I didn't smile. I watched them instead, every movement, every twitch. When the moment felt right, I spoke. I stopped by Boone's old office today, I said casually. The clink of silverware stopped. Oh, Isolde asked, eyes narrowing. Why on earth would you do that? I was looking for something, I said, meeting her gaze. And I found it. Harlan laughed lightly. Still digging through the past, huh? You need to let things go, sis. We all moved on. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. No, you moved on after dragging Dad's name into the dirt while he still breathed. Silence. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath. Isolde's eyes hardened. Watch yourself, Arlena. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I pulled the folder halfway out of my purse, just enough for them to see the wren seal. Because I think I do. Harlan's face lost its color. You shouldn't have that. Then maybe you shouldn't have made him sign it, I said. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Isolde forced a smile, the kind she used at board meetings. That was decades ago. It's irrelevant now. We all did what we had to do. No, I said softly. You did what you wanted to do. She set her glass down carefully. You're being emotional again. This obsession, it's not healthy. I met her stare without blinking. Neither is lying about a man's death. Her fork slipped from her hand and hit the plate with a sharp clink. Harlan stood abruptly. We're done here. Not quite, I said. This is just beginning. I gathered the folder, stood up, and walked toward the door. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. As I reached the hallway, I could hear Isolde's voice behind me, tight, angry, almost panicked. She's digging again, she whispered. We can't let her. The rest of her words were swallowed by the closing door. Outside, the night air hit me cold and sharp. I exhaled, the fog from my breath mixing with the mist rolling off the river. My hands shook as I unlocked the car. I wasn't sure if it was fear or adrenaline anymore. They thought they could erase me from the will, from the records, from memory. But I wasn't going anywhere. They'd buried my father once. They wouldn't bury me too. As I drove away, the mansion lights disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by the fog. I didn't know where this road would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever they'd done, whatever secrets they'd buried, I'd find them all. She said they moved on, but I hadn't even started remembering yet. I eased into the driver's seat of my rental, the engine humming like a reluctant promise, the streets of Charleston still shimmering from the early drizzle. Yesterday's storm had left everything glossed and muted, and I felt every bit of it. The ledger hidden in Mother's attic, the photo scribbled with Dad's words, the knowledge that they had somehow pulled the plug on his life. I was holding more than evidence now. I was holding the truth of a betrayal that had been 30 years in the making. I drove past the marina, then veered onto Magazine Street, where the one-way signs curved around the historic homes like reminders of time sliding backward instead of forward. My target was the retirement complex at the edge of the harbor where Neil Granger lived. He was once the accountant for Wren Estate's inner circle, then he quietly vanished into obscurity. I arrived at the address around mid-morning. The building was modest. Soft white siding, low bushes still wet with rain, a single rocking chair on the covered porch. I parked and stepped out, the air crisp and salt-tipped, and walked up the steps. I rang the bell, hands slightly damp from the humid mix of summer and lingering storms. When the door opened, I saw him, hunched thin, the top of his head gray like winter wheat. His eyes flicked toward the ledger I held in plain sight. For a moment, I wondered if he recognized it. Miss Wren, he said in a voice so frail I leaned closer. I'm afraid I can't talk to you. I understand you'd rather not, I told him slowly. But I believe you know why I'm here. He glanced at the folder, then down at his shoes. The living room clock ticked behind us. I was ordered, he whispered, voice quivering. They told me it was just paperwork. Which paperwork? I asked gently. He tried to swallow. His hand rose and shook. The one you're holding. The one that erased you. I did that. That admission felt like both victory and tragedy. I sat down in a nearby chair, the leather cool beneath me. Tell me everything you remember, I said, and he exhaled, a slow hiss of air cherishing a truth long kept. He told me the date, April 12th, 1995. The time, just after noon. He described how Isolde and Harlan had cornered Dad in the study of the mansion, how he came to him with a file, how Dad refused to sign. he said. Dad trembled. Then, under pressure and threats, jobs lost, whisper campaigns for his reputation, he signed. The contract had transferred full executive rights. A week later, a funeral was staged. You're not crazy, Neil said, voice lower now. They weren't supposed to be so obvious. The weight of the moment washed through me like dark water. My father was alive when they cheated him. Alive when I was erased. Alive when I thought maybe Mom's grief had been real. But none of it was real. I paid Neil the courtesy of thanking him. I hugged him, something I rarely do, and I left, carrying more than before. I drove back toward the waterfront and walked among the racks of moored boats. The afternoon wind launched ripples across the Charleston harbor, the gulls screeching like thrown stones. The marina looked different. I walked down the dock where Legacy Tide used to sit. At its birth, I found a sleek new name, the Isolde. My throat tightened. I ran my fingers along the polished wood of the gangway, then stepped aboard. Inside the cabin I found it, the small compass Dad gave me at 15. The engraving still clear. To Arlena, when you're ready to lead. My breath caught in my chest, and tears rose, but I caught them. I stood, calm, gazing at the pendant in my palm. They didn't just erase me from the records. They took away the symbols, the physical echoes of his love. My youth, my place in the family, the boat we used to watch fireworks from, it was all gone. At dusk I walked off the yacht and sat at the dock edge, the wooden boards cold underneath me. My phone buzzed. It was Delia. We need to talk. I know what they did. My heart jumped. Not just Dad's disappearance, not just the forged signatures. Something deeper. I pressed send on a text. When? She answered, tonight, 7:30, Freeman's Hall parking lot. As twilight faded into night, I felt the pieces move within me. My mind sharpened. The anger was still there, the betrayal glaring at me. But now something new flickered. Hope. A spark. Because if they slipped up once, and I held the documents to prove it, then maybe they could slip up again. And I would be waiting. As the street lights flickered on and the city hushed, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't just erased, they had scheduled me for removal. I slowed the Taurus down in front of the old Wren mansion, just as the day's final light faded. The oak tree at the circular drive was heavy with shadow, and the porch light flickered on as I pulled my car to the gravel. I grabbed the folder from the passenger seat, those documents bearing my father's shaky signature, and inhaled the dry, southern evening air, trying to steady myself. Inside, I felt something shifting. I wasn't simply digging up old pain. I was walking into a frame someone else was cutting for me. Walking up the steps, I felt the weight of every quiet holiday, every family photo, every subtle "you're just visiting, sweetie," that Dad's house ever said to me. I pulled the door open and stepped into the foyer, polished marble, footsteps echoing, the silence of a home that stopped believing it could tell the truth. I headed into the media room, the one where my childhood self was shoved into the corner of every vacation reel. The shelves held stacks of home video cassettes and DVDs, Christmases, 4th of Julys, even the evening Dad announced his retirement and disappearance. I turned on the TV, the picture flickered. I slid the first tape in. Wren Family Holiday 1994. The screen filled with my 4-year-old self running across the backyard, Dad chasing with the hose. I smiled until Dad and Mom came into view and I was gone. Just gone. The cassette cut abruptly to guests laughing around the pool, my shrieking voice gone. My throat tightened. I paused. I pressed pause. My fingers brushed a second tape. Final announcement, April 1995. The tape searched. The screen filled with a sunlit terrace, Dad in a crisp navy suit, Mom beside him, Harlan and Isolde standing tall. Then the image jumped. Just for a second I saw me, looking down at the grass, and then a hard cut. Darkness. Static. The title card flickered back in. I let out a quiet gasp. The man who had always told me, "Don't let them shame you into silence," had been silenced in motion, and so had I. They didn't just erase his voice, they trimmed out everything that tied me to him. A piece of me clicked loose. I snapped the remote down and the tape stopped, the TV dark. Later that same evening I walked to Main Street. I needed air, and I needed perspective. The cafe where Mr. Kincaid used to teach history was open, warm light inside, the smell of freshly brewed coffee. I stepped in and ordered a latte black. I found a quiet table and pulled the envelope from my purse, the document Neil Granger had given me. I turned it in my hands until the creases softened. I thought about Harlan's lawyers, the estate's archives, the polished smiles that masked the cracks. My phone tapped. Message from Delia. Meet tomorrow, 10 a.m., Perkins Street. I tucked the phone away and took a sip of bitter coffee, staring into the dark brew as though it might tell me how to fix this. Before I left, I raised my eyes and saw Mr. Kincaid behind the counter, older, slower, but his eyes sharp. I walked over. He offered a nod. I found some home videos, I said. You remember this house? You remember me? He paused, then quietly said, I remember you hiding behind your father's leg. He chuckled softly. And I remember writing your scholarship recommendation. His voice dropped. Someone made me withdraw it for you. My stomach lurched. Why? His lips twitched. Because you were the threat. Because if you got it, you might ask questions. I sat down again. The cafe's door jingled, and the late-night crowd shuffled in. I took in the light, the hum of conversation, slicing into the night. They started cutting me off long before the will, I said. My voice didn't tremble. It sounded cold, and I didn't see it. Mr. Kincaid leaned forward. It was efficient. A little here, a little there. Until you were invisible. I went home late, the fog drifting under the street lamps like smoke. I unlocked the door, walked through the hallway, and paused outside my old bedroom. My parents still being married, me still being their youngest daughter. I used to sleep with the closet door slightly open, the moonlight spilling in. Tonight I didn't enter. I stayed on the threshold and listened to the floorboards below creak. Then I sat on the porch and surrendered to the darkness. A thunderstorm, muted by distance, rumbled overhead. I crossed my arms over my chest and stared at the road. If they wanted me silent, I murmured, they should have finished the job. And for the first time, I didn't cry, I warned them. Rain hit Charleston before dawn, soft and steady, like the sky trying to rinse something off the city it couldn't quite forgive. I sat in my car outside Delia's old apartment, watching the gray curtain of drizzle smear across the windshield. Delia had been our housekeeper for 20 years, long enough to know when silence meant danger in the Wren household. I hadn't seen her in over a decade. Her message from last night still burned on my phone. I have something your father left for you. I climbed out, pulled my coat tight, and took the steps 2 at a time. She opened the door before I could knock. Time had folded her a little, her back more bent, her hair thinner, but her eyes were sharp. They'd always been sharper than anyone realized. Arlena, she said softly, you look just like him today. That alone nearly broke me. She motioned for me to come in. The small apartment smelled like coffee and rain. Boxes stacked in corners, old furniture that looked borrowed from another lifetime. She poured 2 cups, sat across from me, and slid a small sealed envelope across the table. It was meant for you, she said. He gave it to me the day before, the day before they said he died. Told me to hand it to you during the funeral. But your sister wouldn't let me near you. She said you'd make a scene. I believed her once. I shouldn't have. The envelope was yellowed, edges soft, my father's handwriting unmistakable. For my daughter, when the house goes quiet. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single folded page, the ink faintly smudged but still strong. Arlena, if you're reading this, it means they've done it. They've silenced me. Never believed the quiet. They built it, piece by piece. I trusted no one but you, that's why they hate you. Follow the missing ink. It always leads to what they fear most. Whatever happens, don't let them take your name. Dad! The words blurred as my tears fell, but I didn't sob. I sat there, feeling every muscle in my chest tighten until it hurt to breathe. Delia reached out and touched my hand. He was scared, Arlena. Scared of them. I tried to warn him not to sign those papers. I looked up. You saw it happen. She hesitated, then nodded. He was pale that day. Said they were forcing him. And your brother, he wasn't acting alone. There were men in suits I'd never seen before. That sentence sank into me like a nail. The betrayal wasn't just in the family, it was orchestrated. A network, not a single act. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it into my coat, and stood. Delia, I said quietly, thank you. But don't tell anyone you've seen me. Her face went pale. You think they'd still? Yes. The rain followed me all the way to the Charleston County Records office. By the time I walked through its tall glass doors, my shoes were soaked, my patience worn thin, but my focus razor-sharp. The clerk was a young man who looked bored enough to hand over the country's secrets if it would make the day go faster. I need the death certificate and cremation record for Orion Wren, I said, sliding my ID across. He typed something into his system, squinted, then frowned. We have a death certificate. No cremation file. My pulse quickened. What about burial records? He flipped through a binder, pages crackling. It says cremated remains were delivered to the family estate. I smiled coldly. But no one ever checked, did they? He shrugged. That's all it says, ma'am. I requested copies. As the printer hummed, I glanced over the transaction log. My father's death had been officially registered 2 days before the funeral. And then, 1 week later, another payment, issued to a Wren family consultant, labeled Scene Management. Scene, not service. They hadn't managed grief. They'd staged a performance. I took the papers and left without another word. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavy, like the clouds knew something was about to break. That evening, I went back to the mansion. Not for nostalgia, not for closure, for confrontation. Isolde, Harlan, and my Aunt Mavis were gathered in the parlor when I walked in. The air smelled of white wine and lilies, funeral flowers, ironically enough. They were mid-laughter until they saw me. "Arlena," Mavis said, her voice syrupy and false. "You should have called. We're having a quiet family evening." "Perfect," I said, shutting the door behind me. "Because I have something to discuss with the family." Harlan smirked. "Another conspiracy theory?" "No," I said evenly. "Just a clarification." I pulled the envelope from my coat and laid it on the table. "You faked his funeral. You staged every piece of it. The paperwork says cremation, but there was never a cremation. There was a consultant, someone paid to make it look convincing." Isolde crossed her legs, the picture of composure. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," I said. "And before you tell me I'm imagining things," he left me a letter. 30 years ago. A letter you made sure I never saw. That cracked her mask. Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Harlan scoffed. "You're basing this on a piece of paper? You don't even know where it came from." "I know exactly where," I said. "From the man you killed on paper but couldn't silence in ink." He laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "That's dramatic even for you." I leaned forward, voice low. "You can keep the yacht, keep the house, but you can't keep the lie." Isolde's voice rose, brittle as glass. "You're delusional. There was a funeral, a priest, hundreds of people." "Paid actors," I interrupted. "Staff. And I have the receipts to prove it." For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Harlan clapped slowly, mockingly. "You think you're clever. But you forget, Arlena, you have nothing that ties any of it to us legally. You're just noise." I smiled. A small, dangerous curve of the mouth. Noise can still shatter glass. Mavis stood abruptly. "Enough. This is family, not theater." I turned to her. "Family stopped existing when you buried a man who wasn't dead." The words hung heavy in the air. The rain outside started again, faint at first, then stronger, beating against the windows like 1,000 unspoken truths. Isolde finally exhaled. "You think you can undo 30 years of history with a letter?" "No," I said, slipping the folded page from my pocket and holding it just high enough for them to see my father's handwriting. "But history has a way of rewriting itself when someone finally stops lying." She stood, her glass trembling slightly. "You'll ruin us." "You already did," I said. Harlan scoffed again, but didn't meet my eyes. Mavis whispered something to Isolde that I couldn't hear, and I realized with grim satisfaction they were scared. "I'll give you one chance," I said, stepping toward the door. "Come clean before I make it public. You have 24 hours. Isolde laughed, sharp and hollow. "And if we don't?" "Then," I said, turning back with the faintest smile, "you'll find out what happens when a ghost starts talking." I left them there, standing in silence, staring at the letter like it might burst into flames. Outside, The rain had thinned into a mist, and the moon peeked through the clouds. My car was slick with droplets. I sat behind the wheel and let out a long breath. The ache was still there, but something else had joined it, control. I wasn't a bystander anymore. They could laugh all they wanted. I let them laugh. It's easier to aim when no one sees the arrow. The laughter from the night before still echoed in my mind as I slipped the invitation back into my purse. Isolde's little stunt, sending me an embossed gold envelope marked for family unity, was her idea of humor. The gala at Freeman's Hall was an annual spectacle of polished hypocrisy, where Charleston's wealthiest families gathered to toast themselves under chandeliers bought with other people's pain. I had no intention of going, until I realized this was the same event where my father's foundation used to announce new scholarships. The same foundation they claimed collapsed after his death. Something told me it wasn't coincidence. So I went. Freeman's Hall gleamed like a cathedral to old money that never apologized. I arrived alone, in a black dress that had seen better days, hair pinned back simply. I didn't come to impress, I came to witness. At the entrance, a young usher with a headset looked at his clipboard, frowned, and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, your name's not listed." I smiled, calm. "Try Wren. Arlena Wren." He shook his head. "We do have a Wren, Isolde Wren. She's inside." "Of course she is," I said. "She always is." I stepped aside, waited for the next wave of guests to glide through in sequins and champagne-colored suits, then slipped in right behind them. No one stopped me. They never do when you look like you belong. Inside, the hall was warm and golden, a sea of clinking glasses and polite laughter. The band played something jazzy, self-satisfied. I saw them across the room, Isolde, Harlan, and Mavis, clustered around the mayor like bees around a hive dripping money. When Isolde saw me, her expression barely flickered. She whispered something to the MC, who nodded, his smile tightening. Halfway through dinner, as servers refilled wine glasses and the room hushed for the evening speeches, Isolde took the stage. Her gown shimmered silver beneath the lights, her voice smooth and cool as winter glass. "I'd like to take a moment," she began, "to thank our family for continuing the legacy of the Wren Foundation, especially those of us who've chosen dignity over drama." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Then she looked straight at me. "And to my youngest sister, Arlena, who's here tonight, we appreciate your decision to stay out of legal matters and let the past rest where it belongs." The audience turned to look. Dozens of curious, judgmental eyes fell on me like spotlights. I felt the air tighten in my throat. My name wasn't on the guest list, but my humiliation was printed on the program. Harlan added loudly from his table, "She's always been imaginative." A few nervous chuckles followed. I sat there, back straight, hands steady on my lap. The server approached and discreetly moved my chair, replacing my nameplate with someone else's. "We had to make room," he whispered. They wanted to erase me again, this time in real time. But this time I came prepared. I pulled my phone from my clutch, pressed record, and let it sit face down on the linen tablecloth. The camera caught every sneer, every whisper, mental breakdown. Never recovered. Always thought she saw things. When the applause came, I joined in. Loudly. My smile wide, eyes bright. I made sure they saw I wasn't broken. As I left, I passed by Isolde's table. She leaned in close and murmured, "You always did like to make a scene." I bent slightly, meeting her gaze. "And you always did mistake quiet for weakness." Then I walked away before she could respond. The cool night air hit me like truth. I crossed the marble steps, heels clicking sharp against the wet stone, and headed to my car. Every nerve in my body hummed, not from shame, but clarity. They wanted a performance. I gave them evidence. The next morning, I drove across town to see Emma, my only real friend from the old staff days. She'd been my father's assistant once, sharp with numbers and even sharper with secrets. When I knocked, she didn't answer right away. When she did, her face was pale, eyes wild. "Arlena," she whispered, pulling me inside. "Something's wrong." Her kitchen was a mess of open drawers, paper scattered. "My email's gone," she said. "Every account locked. My phone disconnected. My bank says my card's frozen due to suspicious activity." I didn't do anything. I picked up one of her papers. It was a notice from her service provider, Account under investigation. Contact restricted. They did this, I said quietly. Who? You know who. She sank into a chair, shaking. I only told you about the Foundation files. I didn't. They know, I said. They always know. For a long moment, the rain ticking against her window was the only sound between us. Then I said, from now on, no email. No phone. No online banking. We go analog. Analog, she asked. I smiled faintly. Paper, ink, face-to-face. They can erase data, but they can't erase what's written down in the right hands. Her breathing steadied. I reached across the table, took her hand, and said, if you're scared, that's fine. Just don't freeze. Fear makes people predictable. She nodded, tears caught in her lashes. I'm not backing down. I know, I said. Neither am I. That night, back at my apartment, I laid everything on the table. The letter from Dad, the fake funeral papers, the recordings from the gala. My tiny kitchen had become a war room. I connected my phone to the laptop and replayed the footage from the gala, watching each face as the camera panned across the tables. I zoomed in on the background of a sold speech, rows of donors, glasses raised, laughter freezing in slow motion. And then I saw him. A man at the edge of the frame, older now, his hair gray but unmistakable. Malcolm Keene, my father's oldest friend, the one who vanished a month after the funeral. I hadn't seen him since I was 15. He wasn't looking at Isolde or Harlan. He was looking straight at the camera. I leaned closer, pressing pause. His lips moved, 3 silent words I could almost make out. Then he lifted his wine glass. On it, in condensation, was a date written in his fingertip. April 12th, 1995. My breath caught. That was the day they said my father died. I stared at the frozen frame, my heart pounding. He was sending a message. From inside their world. After all these years, he was still alive, or at least still fighting. I rewound and watched it again. And again. There was no mistake. Leaning back in my chair, I whispered, look deeper. The phrase from his lips matched the letter from my father, follow the missing ink. And suddenly, everything connected. The letter, the ledger, the missing records, the erased files. They hadn't destroyed everything. They'd hidden it, buried under layers of forged charity reports and legal jargon. I sat there until the city outside went silent, the hum of streetlights blending into my pulse. Then I stood, closed the laptop, and looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The world looked washed clean. If they want to erase me, I said to my reflection, they'd better bring a bigger brush. Morning came heavy with anticipation, the kind of silence that happens before a storm decides to move in. I hadn't slept. My phone screen glowed beside the half-empty cup of coffee, the cursor blinking on the press release draft I'd written at 3 a.m. Every word felt like a match I was about to strike. For 30 years they built a lie, and for 30 years the world believed it. Today, that lie would walk into the light on 2 shaking legs and remind everyone what truth looked like. By 9 a.m., Freeman Estates' legal office was a madhouse of reporters and flashing lights. The air smelled of perfume, sweat, and the faint electrical buzz of camera equipment warming up. A dozen journalists packed the small lobby, their voices overlapping in a swarm of questions. Miss Wren, is it true you've reopened your father's case? Are you accusing your own family of fraud? Do you have proof? I didn't answer. I stood at the podium, hands clasped loosely before me, hair pulled back, my father's silver cuff bracelet on my wrist. That bracelet was the last thing he'd given me before he died. Behind me, the double doors stayed closed. The world didn't know yet that behind those doors was a man who had every reason to never trust the sunlight again. I looked out at the crowd and said, for 30 years, my family told you Orion Wren was dead. They held a funeral. They sold off his legacy. They rewrote history. But the thing about truth, I paused, letting the silence draw them in, is that it doesn't stay buried. A murmur rippled through the room. I turned toward the doors and nodded to the man standing just out of sight. The hinges creaked, and then gasps. He stepped out slowly, a cane tapping against the marble. His hair, once chestnut, was now silver white, his face thinner, but those eyes, those piercing, steel blue eyes, were still unmistakable. Orion Wren. My father. Alive. A sound erupted from the crowd, a mix of screams, shouts, the snapping of 100 camera shutters. Some reporters cried out his name. One fainted. I stepped aside, my throat too tight to speak. He reached the podium, his hand trembling as he adjusted the microphone. For a long moment, he just looked at the audience, at the chaos he'd been erased from. Then, in a voice rough but steady, he said, "I didn't die." The room froze. "I was locked away," he continued, each word scraping through the air like stone on glass, "by those who claimed to love me." A journalist shouted, "Mr. Wren, are you saying your family staged your death?" He nodded. "They did more than that. They stole my name, my work, and my daughter's inheritance, and they left me in a private facility under false guardianship, drugged and hidden. They called it care. I called it prison. My knees nearly gave out. I had known, deep down, but hearing it said out loud, that was something else." As he spoke, I watched the live broadcast feed on the screen behind him. The comment section was exploding, disbelief, outrage, vindication. And then the camera caught a glimpse of the doorway behind us. Isolde. Her face was pale, eyes wide. For a split second, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. Then her knees buckled, and she collapsed. The crowd gasped again, chaos swelling as aides rushed forward. Harlan pushed through next, shouting, "This is insane. He's been dead for decades. That's not him." My father turned his gaze on his son, calm and cold. "I watched you sign the papers, boy. You and your sister. You called it mercy. You called it closure." Harlan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. By the time security intervened, the story was already everywhere. Every local and national feed had picked it up. Orion Wren returns from the dead. Later that afternoon, the board at Wren Estate Holdings called an emergency meeting. I didn't even have to push for it. The shareholders were panicking, stocks plunging, reputations unraveling by the hour. We entered the headquarters conference room, a glass cage overlooking the city my family once ruled. My father sat at the head of the table, the place that had been stolen from him 3 decades ago. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice didn't. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to thank my daughter for bringing me home." He looked at me, and for the first time in 30 years, that look wasn't haunted. "Now let's clean house." The next hour was chaos masked in professionalism. Malcolm Keene sat beside me, his testimony ready, the proof of forged signatures, the offshore accounts, the charity donations that had been nothing but money laundering through shell companies. I handed over copies of the documents we dug up. When Harlan tried to object, one of the board members cut him off. "We've reviewed the evidence. You and your sister diverted over $60 million from foundation assets into private holdings." Harlan stammered, "That's ridiculous." "It's recorded," Malcolm said flatly. "I was there." The vote was swift. One by one, hands raised around the table. Removal. Termination of all positions. The sound of the final gavel echoed like thunder. My father leaned back, exhaling slowly. "The company your mother built with me doesn't belong to thieves." I could see the pain behind his composure, not just the years stolen, but the family that had rotted from the inside. Isolde sat motionless, staring down at her lap. For the first time, she had no script, no charm to weaponize. Her hands trembled, rings glinting under the fluorescent light. "You destroyed us," she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." When it was over, the sun was setting, staining the boardroom windows orange and gold. My father stood, cane tapping lightly as he walked toward the door. "Let's go home," he said. Back at the mansion, the air felt different, quieter, almost sacred. The same halls that had echoed with lies now stood still, waiting. My father moved slowly through the corridor, hand brushing the wallpaper as if reintroducing himself to the house. I followed him into the dining room. The long oak table was empty, the chairs perfectly aligned like sentinels of an era long dead. He stopped at the head of the table, where his chair had sat untouched for 3 decades. I picked up his cane and placed it beside it. He smiled faintly. "You always hated this room," he said. "I hated what it represented," I replied. "Power without love." He nodded. "Then change that." We stood there a long time, the weight of everything pressing down. The years, the betrayals, the strange, fragile peace that comes when the war ends but the ruins still stand. I realized I didn't feel victorious. I didn't even feel relieved. I felt something quieter, something steadier. I hadn't won. I had reclaimed. As the night deepened, I walked him upstairs. He paused at his old study door, fingers tracing the brass handle. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "we'll start again." I nodded. "Tomorrow." He smiled, tired but free, and disappeared into the room. I turned back toward the dark hall. The moonlight cut through the window, casting silver lines across the floor. Somewhere outside, a storm gathered far off the coast, silent for now but promising to return. And in that stillness, I whispered to myself, but for one last storm, I needed to be ready. They hadn't lost everything yet. The boardroom door closed behind us with a muted hiss, as if the air itself was too thick to let the lie escape. I stood beside him, my father, feeling every bit of the injustice that had been buried for decades. The papers were laid out on the table between us, a hidden clause, scanned contracts, a confession tape, all the evidence of their betrayal. I could smell the faint scent of mahogany in the room, hear the hum of overhead lights, and the distant rumble of rain starting outside. When I slid the folder forward and said, "Here it is," the silence hit like a gale. The clause read, "No inheritance disbursement is valid without the living heir's public confirmation." It was buried 3,000 pages deep in the estate formation file. I found it after nights of poring through ledgers, after Delia's letter, after watching them laugh at me in the gala and erase my friend's voice. I found it because I refused to be the girl who believed she was powerless. My father's cane leaned against the wall behind him. His hand brushed the table edge as he cleared his throat. He looked older than the days I remembered, a hollow version of the man who once taught me how to ride a bike beneath that oak tree. But the clarity in his eyes was unmistakable. He exhaled slowly and said, "I never confirmed. I never died." Even the storm outside held its breath. Harlan and Isolde were on the far side of the table, their suits pressed and expressions controlled, but their eyes flickered, betraying fear. Between them, the company's CFO and 2 board members exchanged glances. All of them knew the shake was coming. They just didn't realize how loud the thunder would be. I watched the board chairman clear his throat. According to this clause, Mr. Wren's death certificate, his removal of power was unsupported. Therefore, all actions effective from that point are in question. The silence filled with slow beeps of typing and coughs that heard too loud in that space. My father slowly reached for a glass of water, held it a moment, then placed it back down. He said, "The accounts froze 10 minutes ago. The deeds reversed 5. Charity funds seized. We start clean." I nodded. I felt vindication rise like the tide, stronger than grief. They may have crushed me for 30 years, but today I had just broken their framework. The next move was watching the numbers collapse. The shareholders began calling each other, nervous voices leaking into the room. I handed a sheet across to the chairman, shareholder request for emergency action. He read it, then stood. "I call for immediate vote, removal of Isolde Vexley and Harlan Pike from all corporate positions." Harlan sputtered. "This is orchestration." "Or its exposure," Malcolm said quietly, him who had stayed hidden until now, stepping into the light. I was witness. I archived the tape. Malcolm's presence reminded me of the compass engraved with Dad's name. Small item, big meaning. I swallowed hard. The votes were cast. The gavel came down. Their reign ended. The room exhaled. Later, I walked the courtyard of the mansion with Dad at my side. The rain had returned, pattering across the stone path like applause from the sky. I held his coat for him as we descended the steps. Once proud and distant, the mansion now seemed hollow around us, a shelf full of memories and lies. He stopped near the fountain where my childhood friends used to climb the walls. He leaned on his cane and asked quietly, "Do you feel victorious?" I looked at him. "I don't feel victorious," I said. "I feel restored." He nodded. "That's better." The statues around the garden glistened under the lamps. A single low thunder rolled across the horizon. I let the sound wash over me. I placed his cane beside his chair in the library when we entered. He didn't ask for help. He just leaned in and whispered, "Tomorrow we rebuild." "I'll be ready," I said. We stood there, father and daughter in a house that had betrayed us both. I realized I wasn't the same girl he left behind. The storm had broken us, but today we stepped forward in the calm after. Driving up the long driveway before dawn, I watched the first light of autumn stretch across the lawn. The dew clung to the grass in silver lines, and the air carried that unmistakable chill, like something old was stirring. I parked near the oak tree where Dad once taught me how to ride a bike. His laughter, the summer breeze, the fireworks over the yacht, all of it seemed distant now, yet alive in the silence. I stepped out and walked into the house. The front door opened easily, as if someone expected me. The foyer smelled of polished wood and lavender, Mom's fragrance, or at least what lingered after she left. Each step echoed. I didn't rush. I let the memories find me. In the living room, I found the photograph wall, gap patches where pictures had once hung. I pulled a stool, climbed up, and reattached images I'd salvaged. Dad smiling in that white linen jacket, Mom with her arms around us, the yacht legacy tied, under fireworks, younger me clutching the compass Dad had given me. I pressed the frames back into place. The nails held, but they had forgotten something essential. I didn't. Dad found me there. He entered quietly, leaning on his cane, his once strong frame now bowed by 30 years of unseen war. He didn't say a word. I rarely needed it. I turned and offered the stool. He sat. I joined him. We sat in silence. He said, "It's been a long road." I nodded. Longer than I thought. He watched me rearrange the final photo, one of us together, early morning light behind us. His hand hovered near the frame but did not touch. I looked at him. "I never asked you why you didn't come back sooner." He inhaled. "I thought I had, but I was always just someone's ghost. They allowed me to breathe, but not to live." A soft light filtered through the window, outlining dust motes drifting like snow. I placed the photo in its new spot. "Forgiveness isn't weakness," I said quietly. "It's knowing you don't want to carry the weight that broke them." He studied me. "And you're free of that weight now." I glanced away, toward the hallway where years of secrets gathered. "I'll free myself," I answered, "in my own time." The next afternoon, I went to the study to finish the letter I'd been writing to the younger version of myself. The one who'd been silenced. The one who believed the fairy tale of her father's death because everyone else did. I poured tea from a porcelain cup, Dad's favorite green blend, and sat at his old mahogany desk. My pen scratched across the paper, "Dear Arlena, you're not the little girl gone missing in the family history." The sky outside darkened with clouds. I folded the letter deliberately, gave it a quiet sigh, and walked to the fireplace. Flames danced, licking the edge of the paper until it curled into ashes. I watched them drift, turn to gray dust, then flick toward the photo of Dad and me from the morning's light. The embers settled there. I didn't flinch. My throat ached for tears, but they didn't come. I watched until the last spark died. By evening, I found Dad on the front porch. He sat in the rocker we'd always joked was too old for us but perfect for him. I joined him, and we rocked in tandem. The horizon glowed pink and gold. Crickets began their song in the garden. I wrapped my coat tighter as the temperature dropped, feeling the season settle. He told me, "You never stopped fighting." I looked at him, the man I thought I lost, the man hidden behind lies. "Because I never stopped being your daughter." We sat for a while without saying anything. The house seemed to breathe around us, a giant exhale after so many held themselves in. Then Dad leaned over. "Want to walk the grounds one last time?" I nodded. We stepped down the porch together. He used his cane at first. Then after a moment, he let the cadence slow so I could help steady him. I didn't feel burdened. I felt grateful. We reached the fountain, leaves strewn in the water catching in the moving stream. I paused, looked back toward the mansion. "They broke the past," I said softly, "but I rebuilt the future." Dad smiled. His hand brushed mine. "We did it." It wasn't a celebratory moment. No champagne glasses clinked. No triumphant crowd cheered. Just two people who found their way back to each other after a world of betrayal. The night settled around us, and the stars came out, quiet witnesses. In the coming days, we would move slowly. The estate needed care, memories needed organizing, the living needed healing. There were phone calls to make, changes to oversee, but the biggest transformation had already happened inside us. I stood in the moonlight, breathed in the crisp air, and let the wind pick up around us. Unsaid words had their place in this moment. Unchecked apologies, hidden truths, they all existed, but they no longer chained us. Dad turned to me. "Thank you." I said, "No. Thank you for coming back." And as we walked back to the house, side by side, I realized